It has been said that tough times don't last, but tough people do. Well, for those of us who study family communication, the more relevant version of that statement might be that tough times don't last, but resilient families do. For the next few minutes, I'd like to talk with you about one of the newer theories in family communication. It is the theory of resilience and relational load, TRRL. The TRRL was developed by a scholar named Tamara Afifi. That's AFIFI. And the theory has only been around for, well, less than a decade. I think the first published work using this theory was in 2016. The theory looks at the notion of resilience, that is, the ability of a person or group of people, in this case a family, to respond to adversity in a positive manner. Well, we all want to have resilience, but some groups have more of it than others. So why do some groups respond more positively? Why do some families respond more positively to adversity than others? That's the question at the heart of Afifi's theory. Now, the theory itself is, well, it's a theory that builds on other theories, as most theories do. It is a unique theory, but at the same time, it draws from family systems theory. It assumes that a family is really a system of stress and recalibration. That as a family system undergoes change, it engages in recalibration to return to a point of stability. Well, what does that mean for resilience? Here goes. Well, we know that social relationships, such as the ones in families, affect our stress levels. They can add to our stress, they can lessen our stress, but they can affect our stress trajectories, sending them upward or downward. And we know that we manage that stress through relational maintenance. Now, so we have this cycle of relational maintenance as a means of dealing with stress. Afifi argues that resilience is a part of that process, that cyclical process um, of maintaining relationships in a way that helps us to deal with adverse circumstances as they arise. The early work on this theory actually came from a study of families during the financial crisis of, well, around 2007 to 2009, when there was an economic crisis related largely to the housing crisis, where people bought houses they eventually couldn't afford, and lots of houses went into forfeiture. Um, Afifi and colleagues studied these families to try to distinguish what made some families better able to handle such an adverse circumstance. And here's what she found. Well, we know that something like a an economic crisis affects people. I mean, that's a disruption to the family system. And it's one that affects parents, it affects their ability to parent, it affects children, and it affects the mental health of each party involved, each party that's a part of that family system. But Afifi noticed that some families were better equipped to deal with that adversity than others. What she noticed is that some families seemed to come together and frame this experience as a battle against a common enemy, whether it was the banks or the government or politicians in Washington. Families came together against a common enemy, and when they did, they uplifted each other as they attacked that outside enemy, as they externalized the enemy. What happened for those families is they experienced lower levels of psychological stress, better mental health, and those married couples under those circumstances were less likely to divorce than their counterparts who didn't have that same kind of resilience. But more than resilience, or perhaps more specifically than resilience, Afifi refers to this phenomenon of a communal orientation. That is the belief within the family, the common shared belief that this family is a team that can work together to solve its problems, to deal with adversity. Now, it might sound like common sense to you that you might take it for granted that all families have a communal orientation, and they do not. There are different types of families. Some families are traditional, some are interdependent, and some are separates. There are couple types that are described as, there's a couple type that's described as separates. Uh, Couples in which people get along with each other, they love each other, but they keep most of their lives largely separate from each other. For people like that, the degree of communal orientation is nowhere near as high as it is in a more traditional, more interdependent family. So, this communal orientation becomes the key factor, the key concept in Afifi's theory. Now, Afifi's work leads us to some useful bits of wisdom, many of which are related to this idea of communal orientation. First, she argues that people in a relationship invest in that relationship, well, throughout the relationship, in an effort to prepare themselves for adversity, whether intentionally or not. People prepare for adversity by investing in the relationship. So the time people spend together, getting to know each other, the positive regard they develop for each other helps them to be better able to lift each other up in times of adversity. That couples who have a high communal orientation, families with a high communal orientation, are more likely to invest more in their relationships in that way. That communal orientation then affects whether we even perceive a circumstance as an adverse one, and it affects how we communicate with each other in the aftermath of an adverse circumstance. Couples and families with high communal orientations are more likely to interact with each other in ways that constantly make the fellow family members feel validated. That kind of esteem boosting interaction with each other reinforces the idea that we're a team and that we all contribute and that we can all, working together, help solve this problem, overcome this challenge, what have you. Now, but what happens when there is little or no communal orientation? Well, that's when Afifi argues about the concept of a relational load. When there is little or no communal orientation, one of the things that happens in adverse circumstances is the emergence of an increased relational load. And people in those relationships with low levels of communal orientation are less prepared to handle the increased relational load that comes with those adverse circumstances. But all is not lost, because Afifi concludes with probably the most useful practical piece of knowledge from her work, which is that maintenance strategies that help us build the communal orientation to develop the resilience to deal with adverse circumstances. Those maintenance strategies can be learned. People, we can teach people to be better communicators in families. We can teach them to be more supportive of each other in families. And in doing so, we can help equip those people to deal with hard times. If you think about the instances where families go to therapy, often there's a problem that sends them to therapy. What Afifi is arguing for is really the idea that some of the most important work we do with families uh, could be and should be before those crises arrive. That teaching families how to interact with each other in a way that builds that communal orientation is more likely to help deal with crises in the future as they arise. These maintenance strategies can be taught, and most of them are communicative. They're communicative acts. We can teach people to be better communicators in families, and that teaching can help them to deal with crises long after those skills have been taught. And that's why the theory of resilience and relational load is particularly well received as a theory with some high practical value.